Welcome all to the Scale Lab, brought to you by Techleap. I am Joe Wilson, and I'm here with the yin to my yang, Constantijn van Oranje, my co-host, and we're trying to deconstruct what it means to take a company and grow it in the Netherlands and take it out to the world and make it a great success. And Constantijn, once again, fantastic guest.
Yeah, fantastic guest. We have Marleen with us, who's actually grown a company and grown it internationally, and then started to do it again. So she's in the middle of growing her next company, and so we'll be talking about both those adventures. Marleen, let me just fire a first question at you. How did you go from being working in a corporate, becoming an entrepreneur? What drove you?
What drove me? Well, look, I worked at a corporate job in the paper industry, which actually I really liked. Paper is quite a boring commodity, to be honest, but it doesn't really matter. You know, I realize it doesn't really matter really what the product is in a way, as long as you have a really great goal.
We know from the COVID crisis that once there's a crisis, everybody wants toilet paper. So
there you go. And
exactly,
it's an
you never know.
need.
Scarcity emerges.
Guaranteed business.
No, there was a great company with great colleagues, but the jump I made is I was working in quality management at a paper factory, which I really enjoyed because I really do love operations and physical production of things. But I wanted to learn more about strategic elements of business, finance within the business. So I ended up working for a small M&A boutique in the Netherlands that were doing matchmaking for middle-sized companies in the Netherlands, but also Western Europe. I did a lot of work for sovereign wealth funds for that same company. So they really taught me a lot about looking at a company from a strategic point of view, and from a financial point of view. And there I really realized I wanted to be my own entrepreneur. I never really liked my own ideas. After Shapeways, I was cured of that.
Good for you.
And the reason why I made the jump is one of my colleagues, he got into a biodiesel plant, and I was so jealous of him being able to do that. And I realized, I got to start something on my own. And at that point in time, I bumped into the brother of one of my dear friends in the Netherlands, and he was talking to Philips about 3D printing, and I actually had no idea what that was. And I was just mesmerized by the idea of 3D printing and the potential it had for manufacturing and customization. And that's how we got going. And that's how I became an entrepreneur. So...
Nice.
And you have these two engineers, and they with an idea. We often see that the engineers are very good in building a product, but not always in building a business. What was your role in making sure there was an actual business model, and how did you identify that you really had product market fit?
Yeah, so the way we identified whether we really had product market fit was we really did our homework. Actually my co-founder, he went across the globe doing market validation, trying to figure out where in the consumer market there was a connection between a need for 3D printing and potentially Shapeways supplying that. He went all over the world to try and figure that out, and really very organized setup to do market validation. And the results just came back, boom, right on, okay, this is really a market specifically for two things. One of them was, let's say, the 3D printing, creative market. So people that were already familiar with 3D modeling, that had a lot of models on their computer. So that really resonated incredibly loudly. And then secondly, parents with children. So that's when we knew we had a product market fit, just by doing our research. And secondly, what did I do? My co-founders are both software engineers by background, and I was the one with the business experience. I had learned at a large business how companies should be run, from a logistics and manufacturing point of view. And at the M&A business, I really learned how to do valuation accounting, presentation making, fundraising. I did all that. And so I actually became the COO, CFO of the company and made the company scale. It was a few years ago when an old colleague of mine introduced me to somebody, and she says, "This is Marleen. She made Shapeways work." I'm like, "Oh."
That's a nice compliment.
That was a really nice compliment. And like, it's the shortest way saying what I actually did there. So, yeah.
You shaped Shapeways.
Nice.
Well, I wasn't the only one. There was a lot of hardworking people there.
I want to just ask, maybe it's a slight sidetrack from our question, but the market that Shapeways is in, and I think to a certain degree Ziel as well, is this, I'm going to use my words, you correct me. There's this world of on-demand or smaller run manufacturing, or the ability to sort of, serve the makers in the 3D printing, and of course maybe the middle, who wants to be a manufacturer in your new company. It's like a space in the middle for me. It's not like, oh, we're going to serve, we're going to be the largest company in the world and we're going to serve only big companies. It's very much looking at an audience or a need. And how did that, when you look at product market fit, how did you identify that, or how did you describe that for yourselves? Shapeways is one, but of course the new company as well.
Yeah, the new company was really more of a top-down, me looking at the market strategically and thinking what was going on. So Shapeways is really specific, like I just said. And with a new market, I
maybe you should briefly touch on what Ziel actually
what
does.
I do. Yeah. So Ziel is building. Ziel is right now a service for brands and retailers that want to have their own line of clothing, but with no minimum order quantities and delivery in under 10 days. And we're actually building out all of the software and material handling tools that enable cut, make, and trim vendors, so producers of apparel, to move from series production to on-demand production. And because the traditional way of producing is giant series, and there's a lot of things wrong with that. And so the way I got to that idea is it's a combination of careful thought and also silly coincidence, in the sense that, with me moving to New York, I'm a typical lanky Dutch woman being in elevators in the city all the time. So you have a lot of conversations about basketball and the weather. And I always wanted to 3D print my clothing at Shapeways so it could actually fit me, because, the apparel market is not really made for a woman like me here in the US. And so I always wanted to 3D print my clothing. Of course, 3D printing is absolutely not ready for that. And when I had decided to leave Shapeways, I took some time off and I said, look, I really want to dedicate my time and energy to something more sustainable, where I really make some kind of systemic impact on sustainability and on job growth. Because with Shapeways, I created so many jobs, not only at Shapeways, but also with all of the 3D printing vendors that we were working with. And so I really started looking at the apparel market in more detail, and I found all of these production technologies that were being used for series production, and I was wondering if there was a need for on-demand. And so on the one hand, I saw all these production technology that if you change the process control of the technologies, you can actually use them for on-demand quite well, but that was not being done. And on the other hand, you see a market where in the USA, there's per brand and retailer, per collection, there's 40% oversupply and 10% undersupply. And then people are talking about, well, let's use AI because we're going to predict your market better. I'm like, great. That's like rearranging, chairs on the Titanic. It's 1%. Good luck with that. It doesn't really change anything significantly. And so if you have 40% oversupply per season, because you just don't know whether it's going to be green or orange or yellow or whatever it might be, how do you take away that disconnect between supply and demand? Because right now, brands design something, they buy a lot of it, and then they hope to sell it by pushing it into the market. And right now, Corona has exacerbated that issue. It really brought, a lot of retailers either to bankruptcies or to its knees, that this model is no longer sustainable. The way we got to that model was very simple. They're trying to get the cheapest price. That by getting the cheapest price, you go to a low labor country, but in order to get a really, really cheap price, you need to buy a lot of it. So I said, okay, maybe on demand is a solution. Why don't I go and test and see if you can produce on demand? You do it locally. Yes, it's at least 2 times more expensive to do so because you're actually paying your personnel, a decent wage. But by doing it locally, you go on demand, you don't have that 40% oversupply. So you don't have that associated 20% write-off. You don't have that 30 to 40%, extreme markdowns that is associated with that oversupply. You don't have any working capital investment, financing costs, no import fees, no taxes, and all of that kind of, nice little add-ons. And so I said, okay, my hypothesis is that for certain items in the apparel market, not everything, it must make sense to do nearshore or a short order run or on-demand manufacturing. And I basically set out to try and test that and to see if there's a product market fit. So I ended up hiring like one seamstress because nobody would work with me because, if you do, that's basically sample runs and you have to pay a whole lot of money for that. So I bought a couple of sewing machines and one seamstress and tied a bunch of things together, for Shopify accounts and some shipping software and whatnot. Got a designer on board and started looking for customers to just try and find out if it makes sense. And the beautiful thing is, yes, it does. Well, one, it makes sense, from a customer perspective, because now with Corona, all of these warehouses are like up to the, are completely full. And then, we're now getting, it took a while because initially people said I was crazy because I didn't know anything about apparel, which the latter was true. That's changed in the meantime. But now we're growing and big companies are resetting, are resetting and really investing to become much more agile. And what we've done, we've made a move from testing for market validation towards really developing the software behind the enabling of this culture and systems and process change that needs to happen. So,
what did you take from your experience in Shapeways to and that you applied in your new business?
Oh, that is probably that is a lot. I think there's this focus on the customer that you have to do what they like. I think.
Did you get that right with Shapeways?
In the beginning, yes, but the reason why I left is because there's only just so much of a market size for 3D printing enthusiasts. So I left because I thought we had to focus much more on the business market in 3D printing, which is a much larger market. Mm-hmm. And I also, what's interesting in the relationship with Shapeways is that at Shapeways we had built this internal ERP system that enabled this on-demand manufacturing of 3D printing. So for us, we were growing at like 10% a month, for such a long time. And I had to actually scale that. It's not like, oh, you add a couple of like servers, mm-hmm. But we had to actually deliver this, which was quite a task. And so we had to add vendors really quickly. And we ended up building this internal on-demand ERP system, which we would deploy at our vendors. Because we didn't have time to go and integrate, create APIs with their Oracle systems or whatever, like Microsoft Dynamics from 1969, whatever it might have been. So we would literally go to the vendors with an onboarding package and say, okay, there were 2 problems that we had to overcome. A cultural problem with the vendors, because in the 3D printing market, the culture was low volume and very high service. And we were hammering those machines 24/7. And the other problem we had to overcome was the systems, because we had to be able to give lots of orders really quickly, on a real time basis. And so what I'm doing now is a kind of the same thing as I did at Shapeways, is creating the software solutions and the material handling solutions that I can give to the vendors in order for them to make this transition to on-demand manufacturing. And that is very much the same. And the value.
Can you define give?
Yes.
So there's part of that is for free. So it's basically log on to see your orders, being able to all the shop floor, so you know where things are at, etc. So that's basically a login towards this, let's say, ERP-like environment. But there's also solutions that here now at Ziel, my vendors actually pay for, that they can not only apply for the customers that I bring in and the value through the platform, but if they have existing customers, they can use that software as well to handle those customers in a more on-demand or short order run way than before. So that's the major thing that I took from Shapeways, is just making enabling your vendors to help you basically scale.
And was it sustainable? This, because it sounds like you were in the moment solving a problem, as you said. We didn't have time to give the APIs, and we had to kind of just.
The great thing is that Shapeways is most successful now with actually that software that we developed. So there's been tremendous value that we created by building that, and that holds its value on its own now.
So in both cases, you described the technology. If you think of the service at an extrapolated level, okay, we're going to print 3D things for consumers, enthusiasts, and then businesses. And in this case, those brands that want to have their own clothing brand, you can put that into production 10 days. And yet you talk about it as technology companies, not necessarily what people would think of as like a traditional, somebody sits down and cuts out a pattern and gets it sewn. But you really look at it through the technology lens, and that the technology is the solution to the problem. Am I right?
Yeah, well, you have to, because there's, if you think about on demand, it's quite a lot more inefficient. Think about, if you look at a big Asian factory where they make 20,000 pants in black size 8, And now all of a sudden you're setting up a factory that makes 20,000 pieces of clothing that can be size 0 to 5X, because the great thing with on demand is you can actually make people look great according to what they actually need, And so you all of a sudden make 20,000 pieces of clothing from 0 to 5X in how many different colors and how many different silhouettes. So what do you actually do to make something like that, which is inherently, less efficient in a way, to really optimize the time of your seamstress, because that's the most valuable person that is in a factory. They add the value. And, part of that you can maybe automate away.
Do you want to make clothing, or do you want to provide the software for other clothing or apparel producers to be more on demand?
I created it with a seamstress, checked whether there was actually demand and whether it made sense in the market. And then I said, okay, now we're going to raise money to build this platform. And my passion is really my passion is much more, is on two elements. One, I really want to drive this systemic change towards more sustainability and towards more profitability in the market. Because the way we currently produce, without doing anything like super duper biodynamic, etc., is already with 90% less CO2. And that's without taking on any seriously sustainable production technology. It's just by doing it smarter. So if I can provide this platform that allows the industry to move to become more on demand, this is going to drive towards gigatons of less CO2 emissions in this world, and that's what we need. So that's where my major passion is. And on the other hand, I'm an operations person at heart, and I would like to, and I like figuring out those details about how to make these production organizations run more efficiently. And so that's why I have support on the design side and the sales side of things to connect the other side of the company.
Yeah. So we talk technology. Maybe we can talk a little bit about people. So, you take Shapeways, take this company, take your other experiences. The role of talent has played, and maybe the most important hires, other than the seamstress, that you think maybe you've made in either of the companies, the pivotal hires, the ones that made the biggest difference for you.
The pivotal hires, the ones that make So first of all, it's the seamstress and then the designers, because I don't know anything about design, from clothing. So you have to be able to get somebody on board that you can fully trust with making the right things for the customers. So that's really around product design of the apparel. So even though, we have two types of product, we have the product that the customer is wearing that our clients want to sell to their consumers. But then you have the technology product. So if you look about, the two most important roles in the company, there is on the one hand, the design, because that enables things to get, sold and get this wheel going of on-demand and testing whether it actually works. And the other hand is technology, because, that's a role where I have very specific ideas myself around, product management and how on-demand should work, and what the solutions should look like. But I cannot build those. So having,
And if you slightly generalize that insight, if you also look at Shapeways, in what were the key hires in different phases of scaling the company?
At Shapeways, it was the key hires that we made was, at one point in time, like in I think 2011-12, I pulled somebody out of Amazon, and there was a woman who I ended up offering less than half of the salary that she was making at Amazon because we just really couldn't afford it. But she came in anyhow because she loved the mission of the business. But she was a very, very, very strong operator. So we were,
what was
at
her
that
profile?
moment.
What was she?
We ended up hiring her as supply chain director, but she really whipped all of our vendors and our supply chain and customer service into, really, really fine shape with a very high focus on KPIs, repeatability of processes, and all that. And we did that right at the moment when we had launched our initial version of our internal ERP system, which before that had been basically a glorified spreadsheet, running, hundreds of orders a day. And so getting a person like her on board was really pivotal because it allowed us to go, with our reliability of our service level to like 99.8%, with delivering in under 3 days.
And that was incredibly important. How do you pay
important.
for her except for your incredible purpose? But and maybe she was fed up with Amazon anyway. But how did you convince her to come over?
Oh God.
Did you give her options or?
Of course, we gave her options, but even now, I mean, she's left the company by now. She and I are still in contact. I think, I hope, it was really a combination of the purpose of the business and where it was in that moment in time. Shapeways at that moment in time, there was really a 3D printing hype going on. I mean, it's just a little bit ridiculous because everybody thought everything was going to be 3D printed, and that was, of course, complete nonsense. But 3D printing was really being hyped at that moment. And she had a creative background herself, coming from the jewelry industry that she had grown up into, pottery. So she was very, very emotionally connected to the maker community. And I think that's what helped seal the deal, other than the fact that, we were on this really marvelous ride of growth where I could give her, a very, very clear portfolio of ownership.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's... we'd love to obviously generalize these things. I think one of the things that we hear a lot is that you should invest more in talent, in key hires, and that you can actually hire above your abilities.
Affordabilities.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Affordabilities.
And you just proved that case to be true. Like the cost was not the point; it was the mission, I guess.
Yes, but that's not always possible. And I think one of the hardest things that I've, that, and this also comes back to fundraising, is can you afford certain people, And so from a hiring perspective, there's always this, if you're still underfunded or like bootstrapped, etc., you really don't have a lot of money. So you end up sometimes hiring people that are cheaper, but might not be the right people. And it's very hard. So you have to really figure out a way how to get people on board that are really, that are not only worth every penny, but really can help you drive this business forward. Because in the end, you can't do everything yourself. It's just completely impossible.
Well, that kind of is a segue into another topic we really want to discuss with you is investment in capital. I mean, you usually would raise a round if you want to hire that kind of people, or if you want to expand your sales force. You have 2 companies that you can compare. What lessons have you learned from your investment strategy? When to get an investor on board? How has the experience been for you?
Well, at Shapeways, I told my co-founders, guys, I'm really excited to work with you guys on Shapeways, but I think this company should become an independent company. At that time, we were being funded by Philips, and that had advantages and disadvantages. The advantages is that we had a paycheck, paid for by Philips. And we did all this really, well-organized market validation studies, et cetera. The disadvantage is that Philips at that moment in time is not a B2C company, and there was not really a great fit between Shapeways and Philips. So I ended up saying to these guys, like, let's do this, but let's get permission from the Philips board to make the company independent. And so we presented that to the board. We got the okay. And then actually with help of the lifestyle incubator management back then, who were incredibly supportive, we were allowed to go fundraising outside. So we could become independent. And that took a while because we made that decision in the middle of the 2008-9 crisis. If you look at the amount of VC capital that is available in the Netherlands right now, it's very different than 12 years ago, 13 years ago. And it was in the middle of that banking crisis. We actually had we were supposed to do a deal with a VC from a country just bordering the Netherlands. And, that fell through at the last minute. We'd already signed term sheet, due diligence had been done. It was a blessing in disguise with hindsight. But it didn't it fell through because they needed to reserve the cash that they have for the existing investments that they had already made. So that was pretty tough. The good thing is we ended up a year later being able to get a deal done led by Union Square Ventures, which of course is a very reputable VC here in the United States. So
the first ever funding was U.S. funding? I mean, you had Philips.
Yeah, we had Philips.
You sort of came out of Philips, and then the first VC you ever took was an American VC.
Yeah, it was an American VC. And the way we were able to do that is one of the connections we had gotten through the lifestyle incubator of Philips was through a man who had worked in the London VC industry, a Dutch man. And he actually connected us, with his network across the world. And that's how we got to be able to present ourselves at, we got all of these warm intros, and that's how we got to present ourselves everywhere. Mm-hmm.
Is that a lesson as well? I mean, investing in relationships and networks when it comes to finding the right investors?
Oh, absolutely. That's those warm intros were, we would have never been able to do that without those warm intros. And you can also see it with, this is another way of looking at relationships. I was, when I did Shapeways, after I decided to leave in 2014, I had basically been working 24/7. I was actually 32 weeks pregnant when I moved Shapeways from the Netherlands to America. So I had been quite busy. And I'm not a big Twitterer, you can see that. I really just don't find it. I can't say I'm too busy because in a way it's incredibly important to create a profile and be out there. But what I did at Shapeways, one of the major personal mistakes I had made is I was the inside person focusing so much on the growth and the success of the company is that I'd never really put a lot of time in building my own personal brand. So when I decided to leave the company, I had 150 people that were sad about me leaving Shapeways and a number of great vendors that I, to this day, still have great relationships with. But I didn't know anybody else in the city because I'd been either working or, changing nappies. So in order to be able to build Ziel, I really had to start completely from scratch here in the United States. And the reason, I could have gone back to the Netherlands. That was an option. But I did think that, having the advantage of one very large market with one currency and one language, makes the ability to get something started a lot more attractive than doing it in a much smaller market in the Netherlands. But it meant that, and especially starting something in the apparel world, it took me a good 2.5 years to really build a very valuable and deep network, in the city of people that will advise me, connect me, help me, etc. The great thing is about New York is that if you have a good idea, people get really excited about it and they do want to help you. But it took a while to build a complete new network.
So now you're puzzling me. So okay, you go to the US, you get a US investor. This is Shapeways. Yeah. You start Ziel. What do? You go to Groningen and you get a Dutch investor where you're based in the US. So what drove those choices?
Well, there's two things that happened. So initially I started fundraising for Ziel. And so even though Ziel is a solution for the lack of profitability in the apparel market, most VCs absolutely do not want to invest in a company that has a physical component to it. Mm-hmm. Hardware is already to get invested in. Everybody wants to only, do 100. People want to only invest in companies that have no physical component whatsoever, that are purely software plays only. And I don't have an interest in a company like that. I couldn't care less. I don't think it's, I just don't. I'm not a service oriented software person 100%. It just doesn't. It doesn't do anything for me. I would never work for Facebook or Twitter or like some pure software service alone. And so first of all, if you look at the amount of VCs that have an interest in, that are not scared about a physical component to a business, you lose probably, 90%, 95%.
Union Square Ventures clearly did invest in a 3D printing company.
Yeah, fair point.
So yes, that is correct. Yes, but that
10%.
10% portfolio.
They're also highly exceptional.
But it cannot just have been scarcity, because you also have done you brought a part of your development also to Groningen.
Yes, so it's a combination. So I ended up making a choice for the company, which on top of the fact that there is this scarcity, makes the scarcity even bigger. And is that I said that I wanted my company. I incorporated the company immediately as a public benefit corporation, which from a legal perspective is a normal Inc. in the US, but with the fact that you have to optimize the value of all the stakeholders, not just the shareholders. And that scares off a lot of VCs already. I think it's just proper business. If you treat your vendors, the environment, your employees well, you'll in the long term have better sustainable growth and more profitability, which should also be good for your investors. But that's scary for a lot of companies, for a lot of VCs. So then you have an interesting market, the apparel market. You have a physical component, you have a public benefit corporation, and then on top of that, you decide to become steward-owned. And steward ownership means that the company that I have basically reinvests is a self-steering company, where the voting rights are only with the people who are actively working for the company. So not the VCs who don't have voting rights, who don't have a board seat. And on top of that, we reinvest. There's a limit, there's a cap on the amount of dividends, where once we start becoming profitable, there's a limit to the amount of dividend that can go to the shareholders after they got their pre-calculated investment returns. So that is just a toxic killer for 99.5% of all VCs. And the reason why I did it is because I said, okay, it might be a hell of a lot harder to get the company started, but once we get there and once we become successful, then we really have a company where the actual purpose of the business then does not get diluted. Because what I had learned at Shapeways is that to know this VC model is basically in general a model where what's best for the interest of the business is not necessarily aligned with what's best for the VC. And so I said, okay, if you become steward-owned, you basically end up aligning that, because for the VCs that invested in my company, they're going to get a really good return if my company becomes incredibly successful and profitable, but not by creating this hyper growth model and trying to dress it up as beautiful as you can to create a really fantastic exit, because my company can't have an exit. That's basically blocked with a veto share that's held by an external foundation. So why did I do this? First of all, I think there is capitalism is the best thing that we have as a model to create prosperity for the world, but it's not really doing it in a perfect way. You have lots of winners and losers, and the division between the two of them is getting larger and larger. So we have to play with different kind of ownership models to figure out if we can do this better. So that's one reason why I did it, because steward-owned companies in general end up having higher profits, live longer, and have higher tenure with better paid employees. And then the other element of it is that is by, yes, it makes it so much harder to finance your business, but in the long term, if you're successful, you still have your company. And you can actually, like I said, you can protect the purpose and really stay on target. And that is not always possible. You see that also, this is actually a problem for a lot of VCs that invest in sustainable companies. They invest in a small company, it wants to be sustainable, and then when the big money comes in, they end up being not able to hold on to that purpose as much, because the bigger VCs have other plans with it.
It's different in sort of a philosophical position. There's companies that will take on sustainability, I think, in a philosophical position, and then there's companies that are doing it, in your case, like by the mechanical design of the legal construct of the company. You basically blocked things in the legal construct. So in other words, you knew when you set this up, I may or may not get the classic VC money, but somehow we'll find funding.
Yes, and that's what I did. And I ended up finding, and then why did I go to Groningen? Well, it's just really expensive to have a software team. At Shapeways, the software team in the US is so incredibly expensive because New York is just incredibly expensive. And it makes no sense that if you can and I'm not saying the Netherlands is a low wage country or anything, but if I have to be, I'm with this steward-owned model, I'm not going to raise 20, 30, 40, $50 million worth of funding. I don't even want to. I just want this company to become cash flow positive and then, reinvest and grow it. Absolutely. It doesn't mean I'm not ambitious. I'm very ambitious. But I'm not. I don't want to go through that same model that I've been through before. So you have to be really, you have to be able to get a big bang for your buck. And by going to the Netherlands and collaborating with a number of Dutch VCs, one, I was able to fund it, and secondly, we're building a tech team that is with incredibly bright and smart people who can get a lot done, for less than half of the price than I could ever do in New York. So I can just be much more capital efficient.
Were there any, with Ziel, is there any pivots along the way, or is it exactly what so maybe it's still young enough that it's exactly what you set out to build, you haven't been faced with a forced pivot yet?
There's an add-on that we've added because, I said, okay, let's test the market, did that, then financed it. So now we're working on this platform and, we're getting there. So we're working with our first clients. We're starting to make our software revenue is going live in this quarter. So that's all moving along, and that is really great. what we did add is, because of the Corona crisis, we have basically this test factory in Newburgh, which is in Orange County, New York. It's on the Hudson, about an hour north of the city. And because of the Corona crisis, this is actually a facility where we develop the material handling solutions and the software solutions in collaboration with the Dutch team that allow us to build this platform. And so we need to get volumes through those factories. It's not my intent to have 10 factories or 15 factories at all, not at all. But we do use this factory to really build the right, and test out and develop the right solutions that are important for this platform. So we got shut down by Governor Cuomo back in March of last year. I had to put my people into furlough, which is not fun at all, because these people have kids and families and things like that. So within a few weeks, we were actually sewing hospital gowns, because there was a lot of shortage in, just like everywhere in the world. In America, there was also a shortage. And so we pivoted temporarily to making hospital gowns. And then by June, July, we were allowed to do our normal part of the business again. But we've kept the PPE part. So we still produce PPE to this day, which allows us to basically, do two things. Earn money during the pandemic and make sure that we're financially okay. And secondly, make a difference. It was really, when we started making those hospital gowns and my staff came back from furlough, and actually they were making more in furlough with the $600 paycheck that was live back then. They came back because they were bored as hell and they were so proud. It was so nice to see that.
Because they're contributing now.
They were making a difference.
Yeah. Wow, that's a
great
story.
We kept it. So we now have a different business unit that will be there for years to come. That is just focused on producing PPE, and we're reinvesting those profits back into the purpose of Ziel.
And that's a more traditional production, or are you actually applying some of your kind of on-demand practices to that business too?
It's slightly more traditional, but we're using some of the same systems and technologies. So, because we know about agile manufacturing, we were able to put that up relatively quickly. Oh, yeah. So, that's the connection. But other than that, this is, we're making deals here for like 12 months out for X amount of months, for X amount of pieces a month. So it's a very different model. We do it on demand for the consumer market. People can buy masks, basically N95 mask with us. But other than that, it's relatively a traditional business.
Cool. So Marleen, we're going to move to a part of the podcast where we do rapid fire short answer questions. Right?
Okay.
And they may not be so business specific as some of the other stuff has been. So we just want to get kind of an insight into you in some ways, okay? So first question is, if you could travel back in time, say to day one, maybe even before Shapeways, and you got 15 minutes with your former self, and you could, offer any lessons, what would you give to yourself?
Lessons to yourself. Trust your gut. So don't try to rationalize things. Trust your gut. So if you see things that aren't okay, if you feel that they're not okay, they're often not okay. Don't try to rationalize people's behavior away by thinking there was some logic to it, etc.
Is there a positive side as well? You trust your gut into the positive. This is a negative gut.
Yeah, I know it's a negative one. Well, it's just, have some faith in yourself. So it's like, it's scary to be, starting something from scratch is always scary. Have some faith in yourself that you're smart enough and resilient enough and creative enough to be able to find the right solutions and to find a way,
Yeah.
So absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a...
And was there a decision where people thought you were deeply wrong, but you proved to be very right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, now with the apparel industry, absolutely. People said I was completely crazy for trying to do on-demand in the apparel industry. That's just not the way our industry works, and it's ridiculous. People were making fun of me. But now all of the, big consumer groups, big consumer brand groups, initially big family-owned businesses, they went first. Now it's also the businesses that are publicly owned. Now they all have departments how to become more agile and how to become more on demand, and they're all hiring McKinsey
to do that
more
for
or
them.
less success to do that for them. So everybody, where 4 years ago people thought it was absolutely batshit crazy, now they're all working on it one way or another.
So if people are making fun of you, you just might have a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, look, maybe. I mean, the future will have to tell how brilliant I really am, or just really stubborn.
Fair enough.
So
and if you're far enough ahead for them not to catch up.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in the end is I don't have that. I think I was very quickly in seeing the opportunity. I was also too early. And with Shapeways, I was also too early for 3D printing. Yeah. So there's, both of them, I was too early for it to be really accepted. And that made both rides, because of that, a lot harder. So,
if you could pick anyone living or dead to get advice from, who would you pick?
Oh, God.
We didn't
I'm not
say
big
it was going
fans
to be
of
easy.
anybody.
No one for advice?
Who would I pick? There's so many people that I already get advice from that you wouldn't know, and I've picked them. So there's, I've built a really great network of people around me that are maybe not known to the greater public, but there's people on sustainability side, but also, presidents of big consumer brands group, people who really have insight into the market. So, I think the whole point is that you have to go and find these people. You don't wait for some magical thing. You have to go and use your network to go and find them. So there's nobody here that I would be really eager to go and find. No.
So is there anyone? Do you have anyone that's like a hero for you? It could be any historical figure. Doesn't matter.
No. You know what? Your old boss, Constantijn. I met her, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yep.
Nelly Smit-Kroes, yes. And, I was born in the late 70s. So, I came of age in the 90s. And I think she was a minister in the Dutch cabinet back then. She was always on TV. And so she asked me, when I only had the pleasure of meeting her for 5 minutes, I would love to talk to her for a couple of hours, though. I had the pleasure of meeting her very shortly. Yeah. And she asked me really quickly, did you have any role models growing up? Female role models of any kind. And I said to her, look, kick-ass women in the Netherlands on TV when I was in my early teens and late teens. There weren't many strong women. And I told her, I said, you were the only one there. So I don't remember, I remember a few of them in Dutch politics, but nobody as kick-ass as that she was. And I honestly don't even remember much of the politics.
Just the kick-ass.
but just a kick-ass strong woman. And I think that's that's a great thing to look up to have seen. And I think I hope there would be, I hope there's more now for girls out there to look up to. Okay. So,
just a couple more questions. Is there anything that you can't go a day without doing?
A thing that I can't do without no. Work-wise, no. I mean, I need to get outside. So even in this pandemic, I do walks through the neighborhoods every single day with my husband, whether it's in the early morning with my kids almost every day, and at night after dinner, we always get fresh air. It just, is a moment to connect, talk to each other, get some fresh air, walk. We do that, rain or shine, always.
All right, so you've led a company in the Netherlands. You've moved it to the U.S. You're starting a company in the U.S. and having it back to the Netherlands. So, is there anything that you would change? I mean, this is a show about the Dutch, entrepreneur ecosystem. Is there anything you would want to change to help you scale better out of the Dutch market or in the Dutch market?
Look, I think a lot has already changed for the better in the last 10 years in the Netherlands. I mean, if I look at where I was when we started growing Shapeways, there was hardly any VC money back then. And when I started this, just to give you a little bit of idea, people were like asking me when I moved to the US, I was pregnant, remember? So people in my neighborhood would go like, so when you actually arrive in America, are you going to work there then? And I was like, yeah, so why would I move otherwise? Well, my wife doesn't have to do that for me. I said, well, I don't do this for my husband, that he doesn't have to decide this for me. It's like,
wow,
yes. And even when we started Shapeways, people say, well, you have a great pension plan at this M&A business. Why would you do that? I'm like, I'm starting a business funded by Philips. It's like the most safest way to build a business. And if it goes wrong, I can do something else with my life. So what I now see with, the tech scene that has evolved in the Netherlands in the last 12 to 13 years, there is an enthusiasm around working for a small business. Where when I when I got out of college in the year 2000, I'm dating myself here, but everybody wanted to work for Albert Heijn and Unilever and and Shell. And I actually got a job offer at Esso. I'm like, I'm not going to pollute the planet. Why am I actually talking to these people? And so, but there was this thing about you have to work for a big business and go into the big corporate world. And I think what has really changed in the Netherlands, what I can see, is that there's excitement around working for a smaller business and trying to grow that. And I think that's really amazing, and I think it should continue to. I think that I would hope that this evolves further because there's just so much joy in building something from the ground up and seeing it prosper and seeing your team members do things that they thought they couldn't do, and creating success.
Any last advice you would want to give to a Dutch entrepreneur at the point of scaling the business?
Don't be too humble. Even in the Netherlands we have a saying: kinderen die vragen worden overgeslagen. So it's this thing where you're not supposed to say what you want. You shouldn't be assertive. Because if you're assertive, you're kind of like, over asking, and it's impolite and arrogant. And so as a small child, you get taught to be, to basically sit in class and really go with your eyes and say, I know the answer. I want to talk. I want to be part of this. Can I have my turn? But not actually raise your hands, because then you're being too assertive. So this combination is in the US, where the culture is very different. That really, if you want to scale and you want to go to America and you're being your Dutch self, it really doesn't work. So when you talk about your company, you have to basically talk about it, and you have to kind of feel slightly nauseous about how much you're bragging about yourself. Because the Americans won't notice; they think it's very normal.
Yeah, we don't have that nauseous feeling. It doesn't happen to us whatsoever.
So you have to feel slightly uncomfortable how much bravura and boosting you do about yourself and how wonderful you are and how fantastic your company is. And if you are at that slight level of nausea about it, that's exactly right for the American market.
Good.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Marleen. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for taking time with us today.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank
ciao.
you.
Great.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Scale Lab, a podcast brought to you by Techleap. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please share it on your network via social media and give us your feedback. See you on the next episode.